Yo, what's going on, guys? It's me, KingStix. I'm going to be running down the best junglers for carrying solo queue here in patch 10.23. Once again, you can hit at least diamond with just about all these champions, so don't get butthurt. And if you do enjoy a champion and I happen to put it in low elo, just because it's low tier doesn't mean you can't play it in ranked and doesn't mean you can't have fun playing it. Alright, with that being said, let's jump right into it. The first champion to top off our list is Gnar. He is the worst jungler we have on this list. His 1v1s are bad, his ganks are bad. His scaling as a jungler isn't remarkably good. His team fights are relatively weak in most situations, so we're going to leave him here in F tier. Before you ask why I'm putting random junglers on this tier list, like just random champions in general, know that every jungler I put on here has at once been meta in the past, or at the very least has received a direct buff to be a jungler. Gnar being one of them, and with our next guest, one of them as well, with Darius being pretty much the second worst. In front of that, I would put Zed. Zed is a little bit better because he has all-in potential and lethality items are decent right now. In front of that, there's a champion who I really wanted to make a guide on for the jungle, but she's just not worth even showing you guys how to play, and that is Riven. She has a little bit better ganks than all three of these, so we're going to put her a little bit higher up. With a lot of the champions here in this F tier, they're all relatively equal, at least thus far. And then we have Aatrox coming up next. The Galio you don't see very often. It's almost like a worse version of Shen jungle. And then we have a long lost friend, and that is Twitch. He has literally a negative win rate against every single jungle champion. He's just so bad. His item options aren't even good here in preseason 11. And yeah, he needs direct buffs or he'll never climb out of F tier. He's been in F tier jungle for probably the last 8 months or so, or at least close to it. In front of that, we have Ezreal. The item changes weren't too kind to him, and I'll go into it more as we place more champions. I don't want to let it all out of the bag, but yeah, Ezreal's pretty bad right now. Used to be pretty damn solid. In front of him, we have a champion who isn't played at all now because she's so bad, and that's Taliyah. She kind of plays like an AP Twitch, really strong ganks, or at least very fast ganks in the early game. Lots of damage, semi-unreliable CC, very squishy, easy to kill, not remarkable in team fights. So we're going to have to leave her in F tier for now. In front of her, this is going to rustle a lot of jimmies. Just prepare yourself. We have Zyra. She's actually got solid clears and she scales up quite nicely. If the enemy team is mostly melee or if they have strong engage, Zyra is actually a okay jungler to have, but there are of course better options. In front of that, we have Quinn, who in my opinion is a better version of Ezreal or Twitch jungler right now. That being said, not by much. And then we have a melee carry who is traditionally played in the top lane, and that is 𝐒𝐿. If you're noticing a trend, we have a lot of champions in F tier this patch, a lot more than normal. In front of that, we have one of my favorite junglers, Sion. If you really want to give it your all, play your best, definitely pick Sion. Ahead of him, we have Talon. There's actually a player in EUS who hovers around D2 to Grandmaster playing just Talon jungle. You normally run him with Ignite, rush down lethality items. You can get some value, especially if your early gank pans out. In front of Talon, we have a champion that fell from grace in the jungle through the preseason, and that's Morgana. Her item changes haven't been very optimal. If you do have a hyper carry on your team like 𝐒𝐿 or Vayne, she can be good with the peel and the black shield, and her clears aren't bad at all. Her clears are really healthy. In front of that, we have Nasus. He scales up nicely. He has really good armor items he can buy. He plays super well against melee AD enemy teams, but if they're not melee and AD, I wouldn't really recommend him. But that being said, you can hit 1,000 stacks semi-reliably by the 30-minute mark, even if you're behind, which I've done before, and I've actually made a video on that. Technically last season, but you can stack up just as fast, if not faster this season. In front of him, we have Diana. It's just basically her ganks are too weak. She has 0 CC pre-6. That's why we're going to have to put her here. If she had CC before level 6, then she could be potentially D tier or higher. In front of that, we have a long lost relic. Used to be meta, then got nerfed down for the jungle role. That is Qiyana. She has some good matchups, especially against single target junglers who don't have any way to hurt her when she's invisible, like Master Yi. She actually has really good win rates against Yi. Roughly a 55% win rate, because if he goes on her, she goes invisible, and after his Q's on cooldown, she can just blast him into a wall. So Qiyana's actually situationally pretty strong, but normally she's really bad. Ahead of that, we have Tryndamere. If you can scale up, hit that team at, you can start getting the game rolling, and you're a pretty strong split pusher. With that being said, we have to put him really low because Tryndamere right now is kind of meh with how strong tanks are in general. In front of that, we have a champion who isn't picked much at all this season, or last season, and that is Trundle. He's basically only good if the enemy team has a hyper carry tank jungle champion. In front of that, this is gonna make a lot of people mad. It's gonna make a lot of people mad. On my stream, almost every day, people are asking about him, and that's Silas. Silas jungle's pretty bad. He's hyper situational, kind of like the Qiyana. If you're not picking him in the perfect situation, then he's just awful. Terrible win rates against virtually every jungler in the jungle cast. Ahead of that, we have Ornn. A lot of you are probably going to disagree with this. I think you could actually put him down lower. The only reason why I'm putting him up this high is his scaling, particularly for people who are D4 or lower. His ganks aren't that bad. His team fights are solid, and his scaling is really good since you're giving your teammates upgraded items. It's decent enough, I think, to justify putting him at the top of F tier. Then moving on to E tier, holding strong, holding tough, we have Garen. With the Omnivamp changes to the jungle item, it actually helped Garen jungle out from bottom F tier up to E tier. With that being said, I still wouldn't really recommend him unless you're just looking to have a good time. Ahead of Garen, we have 𝐒𝐿𝐂𝐈. He doesn't have the same amount of damage, at least not single target, but he has a lot more CC, and he can contribute a lot more to team fights and ganks than Garen can, since Garen doesn't have very good CC. Ahead of that, we have a champion who I've played off and on in low and high elo, and that is Mordekaiser. He's not that bad. He has good clears. He's got good 1v1s. As long as you focus down objectives and force the enemies to come to you, he's good. He's only bad if you're trying to go to them. Force them to come to you through your objective taking, and you'll be good to go. Ahead of him, we have Camille. I think she's actually slightly stronger right now than she was at the end of season 10 because of the Gromp heal. She can 3-camp clear red buff, blue buff, and do Gromp and be full HP pretty much if she hits a potion and uses her smite. And then she can do 2 or 3 ganks before Scuttle spawns. So she definitely is okay. I think her spot is justified right here. Ahead of that is a champion who has been struggling for a while. That's Rengar. Even with the lethality buffs, he's struggling because of champions like Graves and 𝐒𝐿𝐴. He can't even go toe-to-toe with in their hyper meta. He just gets shit on. In terms of Rengar 1v1s, he doesn't have that much outplay potential. Like if the champion has a heavy CC, he can cleanse it with his W, but if the champion doesn't even have CC, there's only so much Rengar can do. You just press on them, kind of like a Xin Zhao. Generally, his scaling is pretty weak, and he's just not that good in this meta with tanks being so strong. Ahead of him, we have Malphite jungle. I think Malphite jungle is better right now than he was in season 10, since Malphite in general is really strong right now, and Sunfire Aegis is overtuned. Ahead of him, we have a champion who's played primarily a support last season in high elo. He was S tier support champion, and that is Pantheon. His ganks are very similar to a Xin Zhao gank, but he can dive turrets a lot better than Xin Zhao. He's a decent E tier champion. Ahead of him, we have a jungler I usually only recommend for people who are duoing, or if you're in super high elo. Gragas, having a dash pre-6 and knockup is really strong. With that being said, his 1v1s are really, really weak, and his jungle clear isn't that amazing. Ahead of him, we have another lethality jungler who's struggling right now, Nocturne. Just can't compete with the top tier jungle champions. It's as simple as that. And in front of him, we have Wukong. The only reason I'm putting Wukong this high is because he has massive AoE and he scales well, but his early game pre-6 isn't exceptional at all. There's probably half of these characters could 1v1 him pre-6, but if you can hit level 6 without dying, I think you'll start to find a lot of value for your team. Ahead of him, we have a champion who fell all the way from kind of low B tier, high C tier, and that's Teemo. They're nerfing Liandry's and Demonic Embrace, some of his core jungle items. And with Hank junglers being meta right now, it's really tough for him since things like Zac and Mumu can get Spirit Vicious so easily, or Abyssal Mask. They just kind of counter him out. Ahead of him is Brand. He actually got buffs recently, which is the only reason I can put him this high. Same thing, Demonic Embrace and Liandry's are getting nerfed down, so it puts him in a tough spot. Otherwise, Brand could be all the way up to B tier. He's really good. He's a better counterpunch version of Zyra right now. A lot of counterpunch when the enemies engage on you. And sadly, a champion I played a lot of season 10 in every elo, gold, plat, diamond, master, grandmaster, challenger with really high success is Karthus. They direct nerfed his Q, and with the mage item changes, it left him in a really, really bad spot to where it's really hard to recommend him because he's not necessarily easy to play for beginners since you have to kite on him, and yeah, he's just really not that good. Can get one shot super easily. Ahead of him, we have Ivern. He's struggling a bit this season as well. And then ahead of that, we have Jax. Shockingly, Jax actually has a lot of good matchups, particularly against auto attack melee champions, things like Trundle, Diana, even Silas, his passive autos, Nasus, the Quinn, the Twitch, kind of the Ezreal. A whole lot of this cast, everyone below him, he can play pretty well into, except for the mages he can struggle against. But there are some higher tiers that he's good against, like Master Yi, he can rip into pretty hard, and even Graves at times. His early game's still kind of weak at level 1 through 2. Once he's level 3, he starts to shine a bit, but then he's a little bit too item reliant to place him up higher. Ahead of him, we have kind of like an 80 Gragas. He's got a gap closer slash knockup pre-6, but he's just a little too team reliant. His 1v1s peter out compared to others, and his scaling tends to peter out as well. Ahead of him is a champion I used to recommend a lot for beginners wanting to learn an AP jungle champion or a strong one in general. That's Shyvana. She's not amazing right now. The AP jungle item changes haven't been too kind to her. They don't really give her what she needs, and her clear speeds are kind of slow, to be honest. So putting her any higher than D tier I think would be a crime. In front of her as a champion you shouldn't really be playing unless you're at least platinum in the jungle, and that's set. You can put a lot of tempo on the game, but if you're just going to AFK farm, you're going to lose just about every single game. His late game 5v5 isn't that good. He tends to fall off. In front of him is Olaf. He's got decent 1v1s, and his 2v2s are strong. He does tend to fall off though. He can get chunked down in team fights really fast since he doesn't have that good of a gap closer. Ahead of him is a champion you tend to only see in higher elo, which is Kindred. She's a Walmart version of Graves because she can't do a lot of things he can. She's just a weaker version realistically. Even with her marks, even if you have 9 marks in the late game, it only means so much. It only does so much. That's why she really doesn't infinitely scale for the most part. And then in front of her, this is going to seem really troll, but Omnistone Cho'Gath jungle is actually pretty damn strong. Hellbase Cho'Gath jungle as well. Omnistone Cho'Gath's a little bit better because you get those predators and you'll roll pressy attacks, Hella Blades, which are all good on him as well. He can use every single one quite easily. It's actually really strong. His 1v1s can take on most of the people in this cast, believe it or not. His E base damage is insane and his clears aren't bad. They're fairly healthy. In front of him is a slightly team reliant champion, which is why I'm hesitant to put him this high since this is for solo queue. But he does have good 1v1s similar to Jax against auto attack based champions like Master Yi or the Twitch or the Tryndamere or the Nocturne. He's surprisingly good, or the Olaf. Plus he scales up. You can pilfer your 80 carry. If you have a hyper carry, he's a solid choice if the enemy team is auto attack based with his circle. In front of him is a champion who has a little bit better ganks. Xin Zhao's dash is easier to land than Shen Taunt. It's not a skill shot. Plus Xin's easier to play in general, less thought process. So we're going to put him ahead. And then in front of that, we have Mundo. Now, if the enemy team is full AP, Mundo is basically high B tier. But if they're not full AP, then yeah, he's like D tier. If they're full AP, his E, when it's maxed, gives him roughly 30% bonus magic resist. And then his flames are giving him 30% tenacity. So mages can't really CC him. And when they hit him, nothing happens because he has so much magic resist. So it just runs him down, chews him up with his E bonus damage, and they die. It's super, super fast. Ahead of him is typically a D4 plus champion in Italy. AP version of Graves. You could argue it scales better than Graves if she has a good 80 carry because she can heal them, but generally in Italy's kind of meh right now. You only really see her or want to have her in higher elo. If you're playing lower than D4, I wouldn't recommend it. Ahead of that is Volibear. He's okay. He's just kind of meh. Not crazy about him. If they nerf Chemtank or Sunfire Aegis, he's kind of fucked. Those are his only 2 items he can really go right now. Ahead of him, we have another D4 plus champion, Lee Sin. Very meh. Win rate's meh. Pick rate high because people like to be flashy like Yasuo players. Wouldn't recommend him. His late game 5v5 is meh. He loses a lot of 1v1 against meta champions. You have to be super creative on him and be playing super clean to find high value. Ahead of him, we have Rek'Sai. She's just a slightly better version since she has CC pre-6 and Lee Sin doesn't. She can force stronger ganks. She doesn't need wards to jump to. She can jump over a back wall and set up a deep dive or a deep flank gank. So in general, pre-6 she's a lot better, and they both fall off roughly as hard, but he does outscale her a little bit. And then ahead of them, we have Master Yi. In solo queue right now, he's actually really strong. You don't even have to funnel on him right now if it's D4 or lower. It's really, really strong, and the funnel on him is still highly viable. So if you want to funnel or play him solo. Ahead of him, we have Echo. He's been all the way up at S tier last season, but mage changes and the meta junglers are suppressing him greatly. Ahead of him, we have Sunfire Aegis Warwick. Now, if you're building him a different first item than Sunfire Aegis, I'd probably put him lower. But with Sunfire Aegis Rush, he's actually really damn strong. Ahead of that, we have 𝐒𝐂𝐂𝐈. He can go AP or AD, even though AD is more optimal. Plus lethality items are good right now, giving 𝐒𝐂𝐂𝐈 a definite edge over the Warwick. And ahead of them, we have another mid-tier champion who stayed high C tier, low B tier for seasons now, and that's Vi. She can go lethality, she can kind of go tanky. So she has some item options similar to Warwick, but overall I wouldn't recommend her if you're not a one trick. And then ahead of that, shockingly, we have 𝐒𝐻𝐿. The new items have given him new life. Plus, they've been buffing him a lot. They buffed him 3 or 4 times last season, with one of the biggest buff giving his Phoenix stance some serious AP scaling. He's not awful right now, but he's unique enough to where I wouldn't recommend him unless you're willing to one trick him, similar to a Vi or an Ivern. They're just so unique and finicky that unless you want to marry them, I wouldn't do it. Ahead of that, we have a champion who arguably got the strongest compared to where they used to be from last season, and that's Poppy. She went from being dog tier to being at least low B tier, and situationally she's A tier. If their team's super AD heavy and dash heavy, she can be super impactful with her W displacement on their dashes. And her best items being Sunfire Aegis into Deadbands clearly sets her up to play well against AD comps. So has a lot of potential. I think she's underplayed right now. Ahead of her, Skarner. I'm only doing this because the Skarner mains are pumping his win rate all the way up to 60% with a very low pick rate. Other than that, though, I wouldn't recommend playing Skarner in general unless you're willing to one-trick him, like the 𝐒𝐻𝐿 or the Ivern. And ahead of that, we have Lilia. If you're playing her below Diamond, she's honestly kind of poop tier. I wouldn't recommend it, especially if you're gold or lower. She kind of gets lower with every elo because her carry potential goes out the window. With the way her R works and the way she stacks up her movement speed, she's kind of reliant on her teammates to give her value. With that being said, D4 plus, B tier, and then for every elo, she drops a little bit. Alright, so next up we got Fiddlesticks, still super strong, really good beginner champion. He can play well in every single elo. Massive art impacts and shut down team fights in general if the enemies aren't warding properly. Ahead of him, we have Sejuani. She's risen from basically E tier all the way to B tier. If Sunfire Aegis gets completely gutted, then she'll be fucked. But while the Sunfire items are still overtuned, she's really strong. Her burst is shockingly high, and she's one of the best scaling tanks. The only tank that outscales her, in my opinion, is Zac, who I would put ahead of her. He's got more CC, he outscales her, and he has a little bit more damage from what I've seen. And then we have Evelynn. Evelyn's a little bit tougher to play than a lot of these champions in terms of macro, being in the right spot at the right time. If you get hit by 1 CC, you're gonna die, and you're very squishy. If you have the time, you learn or you can hyper carry, get a lead, and you'll shut people down and they'll get super frustrated and talk about how she's OP, even though her win rate and pick rate is a lot lower than other jungle champions. That being said, she's still really good in solo queue because of her invisibility mechanic and people's unwillingness to buy pink wards. Mainly because there's be 1 or 2 people buying pink wards and then they'll get broken and then they'll get frustrated at their teammates for not helping to buy pinks, and then no one will buy pinks type of thing. If they would literally all just buy pinks, you could shut her down pretty easily. Alright, so ahead of Evelynn, we have Elise. She's super damn strong in D4 plus, D1 plus, challenger, really strong. You may say, well, why isn't she good in low elo? She does fall off, so if you're not able to end games before the 30-minute mark, you're going to start to lose a lot of games. So if you want to kind of one-tricker or play her D4 plus, then she's a really good AP champ right now. Ahead of her is 𝐒𝐿. Honestly, he's about to get nerfed, which could easily drop him into B tier, but for now, we'll just leave him in A tier. Really strong AD mobile champion. Almost like a Rammus, but not tanky. But he can carry harder than Rammus if he gets early gold. With how OP Sunfire Aegis is right now, and with how good Thornmail is, Rammus is a little bit better. Once again, they're going to nerf 𝐒𝐿, and most likely they're going to have to nerf Sunfire Aegis because it's just so damn strong. But yeah, for now, Rammus is actually really good, especially if the enemy jungler's AD. You can get into an early Sunfire Aegis into Thornmail and just get super high value, like the Poppy Sunfire Aegis into Deadman's Plate. If you're playing against an AP jungler, would not recommend going Rammus. I mean, technically you still can, especially if their team is AP heavy, because then you can just stack MR items, but optimal builds on Rammus are definitely armor heavy. Ahead of him is a champion who's getting permaban now in D4 and lower, or even in high diamond and lower, and that's a Mumu. If you don't invade him and fuck him up early, he's a monster. They made his R a stun instead of an entanglement / disarm. You can't do anything. Before, if you like ulted in Annie could drop a full load on his head, or Lux could throw out a shield. You just couldn't auto attack or use any movement spells like flashes or jumps. So now the stun is super scary. Plus Sunfire Aegis once again works really well on him. Demonic's Embrace is really good. They did nerf Sunfire, but they didn't nerf it enough. But they're also nerfing things like Agony's Embrace soon. So Amumu could drop down a bit, but at the lowest, I think he'll get dropped as C tier unless they're just willing to gut him. Alright, so next up we have Kayn. I need one for red Kayn and blue Kayn. Blue Kayn and like high diamond and up is really good, arguably S tier. But in general, D4 and lower, Red Kane's way better because Blue Kane in 5v5s tends to fall off. He's kind of like an AD Evelyn. He gets hit by 1 CC and insta-dies. Red Kane is a way better version of Warwick, just infinite healing. You can't kill him. You're about to kill him, then he Rs, then he's full health again. He just does way more damage, has overall late game stronger item options than things like Warwick or Udyr. Kane's a monster. We'll put him A tier. This is for kind of Red and Blue Kane. And then ahead of him, we have 𝐒𝐿𝐾𝐋𝐒. Yeah, 𝐒𝐿𝐾𝐋𝐒 is really strong. Lethality item strong, 𝐒𝐿𝐾𝐋𝐒 strong. Going invisible off a Dust Blade is disgusting. So many invisibility, so much isolation damage. It's just too damn strong. Now, we have 3 champions left, guys. So, I hate to break it to you, but Quinn Jungle, she's S tier. Nah, I'm just fucking with you. I've actually already placed Quinn in F tier. But for some reason, there's 2 of her here. I think it bugged out. Graves is S tier in Diamond and up. D4 plus, he's S tier, especially D1 plus or in Challenger. He's really good. Even though his win rate's lower than things like a Mumu, Platinum and up. Once Graves players are like D1 plus, they'll put a lot of pressure. So things like Rammus, even Rammus, Mumu, Zac, Evelyn, the Kane, you can have trouble against 𝐒𝐿𝐾𝐋𝐒. If he invades him, 𝐒𝐿𝐾𝐋𝐒 is in bush, that could get really nasty. But with a lot of them, Graves just shows up in your jungle before you're level 3 or before you're level 6 and mows you down and then tempos the game in high elo. If you're not at least D4 plus, then Graves is kind of just B tier. If you're D4 plus, he's definitely S tier, especially D1 plus. All right, so next up we have Nunu. He is the best of the best. Nothing counters him. He has really good armor options. He has really good MR options. Spirit Visage OP on him for the healing. Dead Man's Plate OP on him for the movement speed so he can land W's in his E's. Nunu is fantastic right now. One of the biggest things you may have noticed is how this tier list looks way different than my other jungle tier list, and that is the distribution of it. So many more champions instead of being in C tier, D tier, where that used to be the bulk of them. So many of them are F tier. So many of them are E tier, just so weak because of the meta junglers. Primarily the meta ones who are oppressive right now for everyone else is the Nunu, Graves, Amumu. It's kind of just A tier and up. A tier and up is so oppressive right now. It makes it hard for the other tiers to shine, especially the low tiers. Just cripples them super hard. It's kind of like the equivalent of Marth in Super Smash Bros. Melee with the disjointed hit boxes, basically wrecking every single low tier in the game. Just the low tier destroyer. So yeah, guys, that's gonna wrap up this video. What I would recommend is really just not playing anything lower than D if you want to climb and improve at the game. If you just want to have fun or just play a champion you like, then it's whatever. But ultimately, if you're just trying to climb, then I would say D tier and up. That's going to wrap up this list though, guys. I tried to do it as accurately as I could for solo queue. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Is there anything you guys would change? Do you disagree? Let me know why. I'm interested to see what you have to say. If you guys haven't had a chance yet, come chat and chill live on stream. My name is KingStix. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.